Sir, that was not the question. Is there a person? Is there a person, a living individual on the boat?
There's lots of people breathing on the boat.
All right, how many people, sir?
Like 7.
New audio has surfaced from the Nolan Wells case, and what you just heard is only part of it. Investigators believe there are voices buried underneath that call, voices asking if someone was already dead. In a moment, I'm going to walk you through exactly what's been pulled out of that recording, how and why experts are taking it seriously. On top of that, there's a boat timeline that genuinely doesn't add up. A public fight between the United Cajun Navy and family attorney Ben Crump over one word, and a district attorney sitting on evidence she won't release until a grand jury sees it first. I'm breaking down every piece of this, because none of it makes sense in isolation. It only makes sense together. This is the fatal truth, where we don't move on from a case until the questions are actually answered. So if that's what you're here for, hit subscribe, because this one is far from finished. Quick context so we're all on the same page. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18, from Ocean Springs, Mississippi, a college football player who went out to Horn Island with a group of friends on July 4th. He never came back with them. 2 days later, his body was recovered in the water just off the island. The official explanation is that he chose to stay behind. His family has said from day one that doesn't sound like him. That single contradiction is the reason this case is still being picked apart piece by piece. And it's exactly why that CTO recording has become such a big deal. Let's actually sit inside this call, because there's more going on in it than a boat with a broken bilge pump.
CTO Assistant, Vicky speaking. How can I help you?
Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn, and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can y'all please come? We have a membership.
Right away, something's shaky. He doesn't know how far the water's risen. He doesn't have his own membership number. He has to physically go find GPS coordinates instead of already knowing them. And then the dispatcher asks the one question this entire recording ends up hinging on.
All right, how many adults and children on board?
No, there's no children.
So, is there anybody on board? How many adults, sir? That was the question.
There's 0 adults on board.
There's nobody on board the boat?
No. Nobody
right.
here is over the age of 21.
Sir, that was not the question. Is there a person? Is there a person, a living individual on the boat? Is there a living person, someone breathing on the boat? Is there anybody on the boat?
There's lots of people breathing on the boat.
All right, how many people, sir?
Like 7.
Now here's the part that's turned this from a routine emergency call into something people are dissecting frame by frame. Digital forensic experts who've reviewed the recording say that when you strip away the 2 main voices, the caller and the dispatcher, and isolate what's happening underneath them, there's a second conversation layered into the background, and it's not casual chatter. What you can reportedly make out is one voice asking whether someone is dead, another sounding like it's telling someone to wake up, somebody shouting in what sounds like real panic. And underneath all of it, what several people who've listened closely believe is a name being said: Nolan. Here's how that kind of audio work actually happens, in case you're wondering whether this is guesswork. Analysts isolate individual audio frequencies, essentially separating out different voices the way you'd pull apart instruments in a mixed song track. Then they adjust the gain, turning down the loud foreground conversation and turning up whatever's quieter underneath it, and run noise reduction to strip out static, wind, and engine sound. Slowed down, sped up, isolated, and cleaned, background conversations that were originally impossible to hear on a first listen can become legible. That's not a special trick reserved for this case. It's standard practice in audio forensics, the same kind of processing used to clarify police radio traffic or muffled 911 calls in plenty of investigations. And that matters here specifically because this case has already been flooded with fake material. There's at least one viral video showing a young man face down on a beach being attacked that has been confirmed to not be Nolan at all, a piece of content that spread as if it were real crime scene footage. There have also been AI-generated clips circulating that were never real to begin with. So skepticism about new audio is completely fair. But this isn't some anonymous clip pulled off social media. It's the same official recording the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources already released. Nobody's claiming a new tape appeared from nowhere. The claim is narrower and, honestly, more interesting, that there was always more in this recording than what most people heard the first time through. So sit with that for a second. If there really are voices in the background of that call, asking whether somebody was dead, this stops being a story about a boat with mechanical trouble. It becomes a story about a group of teenagers who may have already known something was seriously wrong before they ever picked up the phone to call for help, and who told the dispatcher, when asked directly, that everybody on board was breathing just fine. One word, right now, do you think that background audio is real, or do you think it's people overreacting to bad phone static? Comment below, because we're circling back to this exact tension by the end of the video. Now let's talk about the boat itself, because the movements of that vessel over the following hours raise just as many questions as the audio does. According to tracking data that's been pieced together from GPS records, the boat left its original dock that morning around 9:56 and arrived near Horn Island a little over an hour later, around 11:14. It stayed out near the island for hours. Then, around 4 p.m., the distress call goes out. Sinking, need a tow, please hurry. Here's where it stops making sense. If a boat is genuinely taking on water fast enough to justify an emergency call, you'd expect it to get hauled straight to a dock and pulled out for repairs immediately. Instead, records show the boat was towed only about 3 miles before that tow was called off entirely. The boat then kept moving on its own power, heading toward a different dock, then eventually toward a boat launch over the next 2 hours. At one point, there's a documented gap of roughly an hour and 13 minutes where the boat is simply sitting, docked, doing nothing, despite everyone involved insisting, less than 2 hours earlier, that they were actively sinking and needed emergency help. It isn't until later that evening that the boat is finally pulled out of the water and loaded onto a trailer. If you were on a boat that was really sinking, would you leave it sitting at a dock for over an hour before finally taking it out of the water? That's the kind of detail that makes people ask whether "we're sinking" was really about the boat at all, or whether it was the fastest way to explain needing help without saying what actually happened. There's one more detail buried in this same call that's worth pulling out on its own, because it undercuts something the public was told early on. Throughout the entire sea tow conversation, the caller has clear enough phone reception to hold a real-time, back-and-forth conversation, read off precise GPS coordinates, and get transferred between 2 different people without the call dropping. Remember that, because for weeks, one of the explanations offered for why so little exists from Nolan's side of that day, no calls, no messages, nothing posted, was that cell reception out near Horn Island was simply too unreliable to use a phone at all. Some versions of that explanation even suggested saltwater exposure was a factor, as if that would somehow matter to a phone left untouched on a boat. But if a member of that same group could hold a clear phone call for several minutes from roughly the same stretch of water, the reception excuse gets a lot harder to accept at face value. Now, about the story that Nolan chose to stay behind. There's a version of that explanation that's been circulating involving a young woman he'd reportedly spent part of the afternoon with. The idea being that he wanted to stay on the island because of her. Except when her side of the story became public through her family, it didn't back that theory up. According to her account, Nolan told her he was leaving with his friends that day, not staying behind with her, and she assumed, based on that conversation, that he made it back onto the same boat he'd arrived on. She's reportedly cooperated fully with investigators throughout. So if Nolan didn't stay behind for her, and multiple people close to this case say staying behind at all was completely out of character for him, the entire "he wanted to stay" narrative is looking a lot less solid than it did in the first few days of reporting. That kind of unraveling explanation is exactly why Nolan's family brought in attorney Ben Crump and paid for an independent second autopsy, which is where our next major thread comes in. At the Knockup National Convention in Chicago, Crump made a claim that reframed the entire case in a single sentence. The United Cajun Navy. They were so forthcoming, the fact that they told us, we haven't heard from any local officials, that Nolan was found face down, fully clothed. The last confirmed footage of Nolan, recorded roughly 40 minutes before he was last seen, shows him shirtless in blue swim trunks. Found fully clothed would mean somebody put clothes on him after that footage was recorded. The United Cajun Navy denies that conversation ever happened, insisting Nolan was found wearing only swim trunks and accusing Crump of misrepresenting them entirely. The confusion traces back to their president, Todd Terrell, telling a television interviewer 2 days earlier that Nolan was found fully clothed, a comment he's since said was about location, not clothing, pointing to strong rip currents and a steep drop in water depth in that area as a more likely reason a body would surface near where it went in. There's a second dispute tied to the same organization that follows an almost identical pattern. The Cajun Navy says it offered Nolan's family the use of cadaver dogs and scent detection dogs to search the boat, and that the offer went unanswered. But there's a basic legal problem baked into that claim. It isn't the Wells family's boat. They have no legal authority to grant anyone permission to search a vessel that belongs to someone else's family. So an unanswered offer to search a boat nobody in that conversation actually had the right to authorize searching doesn't tell us much of anything on its own. It's also worth understanding, according to defense attorneys who've weighed in publicly, how a case like this is supposed to be handled from an investigative standpoint. Standard procedure would call for separating every witness who was on that island, taking each of their accounts individually rather than letting them coordinate a shared story beforehand, documenting rights waivers on video, and asking directly whether each witness would be willing to sit for a polygraph. Understanding that polygraph results aren't automatically admissible in a criminal trial unless both sides agree to it ahead of time, though they can matter more in a civil case down the line. As for the boat itself, legal experts have pointed out that under long-standing law governing searches of vehicles that could disappear or be altered before a warrant is secured, a boat that's actively being moved around could arguably have been searched immediately, without needing to wait on paperwork at all. Whether cadaver dogs would even find anything at this point is its own open question. Trainers who work with these dogs say scent evidence has, in past cases, been detectable months or even years later, which means time alone may not have erased whatever, if anything, is left to find. Underneath all of that public back and forth, there's a quieter detail about the autopsy itself that deserves attention, because it's easy to make it sound sinister when it might not be. Forensic pathologists who've discussed this case publicly say that retaining neck tissue for further examination, rather than releasing all of it for the family's second exam, is sometimes done specifically because decomposition makes it genuinely difficult to tell the difference between injury that happened before death and ordinary blood settling that happens afterward. Deeper microscopic testing of that tissue can help resolve that ambiguity one way or the other. That doesn't confirm foul play, and it doesn't rule it out either. It just means the state's examiner hasn't finished the process of eliminating other explanations yet, and until that testing is done, nobody outside that lab actually knows what it shows. The district attorney, Angel Myers-Mickerath, has confirmed the official autopsy findings exist, but says they won't be released publicly until a grand jury has reviewed them. Standard procedure in her office for any death investigation, she's said, not an attempt to hide anything. A grand jury's role isn't to decide guilt, it's simply to determine whether there's enough evidence here to justify formal charges moving forward at all. Releasing findings before that review happens could shape witness accounts or influence the pool of people who might eventually serve on that jury, which is part of why prosecutors so often choose to wait. And all of this has unfolded against a backdrop that's genuinely hostile. Nolan's mother has said publicly that her family has been accused of everything from bad parenting to exploiting a GoFundMe, and that she personally has been called racist online, simply for asking what happened to her son. Some of Nolan's friends say they've received death threats serious enough that one described missing another friend's funeral out of concern for his own safety. Even people connected to the investigation itself are reportedly facing threats. None of that tells us what actually happened to Nolan on Horn Island. But it does explain why so much of what's public about this case has been shaped as much by outrage and speculation as it has by confirmed fact, and why officials keep stressing that a careful investigation takes time, even when nobody wants to hear that. So here's where this actually stands. A death first treated as an accidental drowning. A family that refused to accept that without a second opinion. A recording that may contain background voices asking whether someone was already dead.
Dispatch, excuse me,
that kept moving for hours after supposedly sinking, what does this tell you? And sat unexplained at a dock for over an hour in between. A reception contradiction nobody's addressed. A theory about a girl on the island that her own account doesn't support. A dispute over a single word, clothed, that both sides insist the other one twisted. And a district attorney holding results that could resolve most of this, or complicate it even further, depending entirely on what a grand jury decides to do with them. So let's go back to where we started. Voices asking if someone is dead, someone pleading for Nolan not to die, and minutes later, on the exact same call, a completely different version of the story. Everyone breathing, everyone fine, just a boat with a bad pump. Which one of those was the truth? And why does the second version sound so different from the first? Now that you've heard all of it, the hidden audio, the boat's movements, the reception contradiction, the sealed autopsy, has your answer changed from when this video started? Tell us below. And the second that grand jury moves, we'll be back to break it down for you.